I remember it as clear as if it was yesterday, even though it was close to 40 years ago now. I can see myself standing in the kitchen of my second floor subsidized block apartment. I had grown weary of the monthly drive several towns over to the County Social Security Administration office, where I would justify my worthiness to receive food stamps. There I would present my tallied income from waitressing at a local breakfast and lunch diner, the morning paper route, and the late afternoon cashiering at the local Stop and Shop. Should the varying hours and tips total anything over the designated amount, I would lose the privilege, regardless of the fact that it was never equivalent to or greater than what the subsidy provided. I decided then that I wasn't going to do it any longer, determined that I would manage. We would get by. I stepped out in faith that day because I knew I had the support of an incredible circle of friends who lived a somewhat collective alternative existence. We cared for one another and our world. I was one of the fortunate ones. My story is sadly not unique or outdated. The poverty line, a product of the 50s and 60s and LBJ's administration, was created as a means to determine what was the minimum necessary for a family to survive, so that some measure of assistance could be offered. And while our economy has had its ups and downs since then, the cost of living has increased significantly. The line itself has barely moved, or if it has not done so in ways proportionate to the times. In 2021, a family of 6 needed to earn less than $35,580 a year in order to qualify for food stamps. A family of 6. In January, I listened to a piece on NPR about this topic. It highlighted a family whose income totaled $30,000 at best, pre-pandemic. The woman who spoke, her name was Violet, shared that she was disabled, and she worked part-time, about 15 hours per week, with no benefits, earning $17.50 an hour, so about $13,000 a year. Her husband worked too and earned about $17,000 per year. They had been receiving food stamps for 4 years, and once their income exceeded $20 over the limit, they were cut off, even though the $20 was not equivalent to the assistance amount they were getting. I am not surprised, more disappointed than anything else, that this is still the case after so much time. The guests that day on the broadcast were Mark Robert Rank, a Washington University professor and author of the book Poorly Understood: What America Gets Wrong About Poverty, and head of the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, Amy Glassmeyer. Together, they laid out some of the history and the myths surrounding poverty in our country and provided a compelling argument for a paradigm shift when it comes to this subject. The real truth is that here in the US, 65% of us will experience 1 year below the poverty line between the ages of 20 and 75, and that 75% will experience significant impoverishment. The truth is that poverty is not an inner city problem, that the majority of the poor in the U.S. are white, that hard work is not enough, and that agency is constrained for those with fewer resources. What we suffer from here is not so much insufficient funds to put food on our tables, but instead, we are impoverished of support. What we need is a system that seeks to provide for the well-being of all of our people. This idea of an absolute line, an amount that designates services to those who fall below it in income, and those who earn any amount over it lose access, what they referred to as the cliff effect, is not realistic. We are not thinking this through. In most developed countries, such as in Europe, there is a relative definition of poverty that puts people's needs as a priority. It is assumed that everyone should get some level of assistance in order to bring equity, that no one should be unfed or unhoused, that it is a matter of basic human rights. Here in America, we view poverty through the lens of individualism and promote the idea that anyone can be successful if they simply work hard enough. We have developed a system that creates the deserving and the undeserving poor in our country. Rank likens it to a game of musical chairs, which inevitably produces losers, those who have no seat when the music stops. It places blame on those who don't have enough, and a state of social disenfranchisement with its accompanying lack of freedom and restrictions on ability and activity. What we need instead is to look at our system overall in a more holistic and textured way that reveals what is really going on in people's lives. Violet and her family have decided to take up subsistence farming to offset their food costs. But should they have to? Coretta Scott King, in our reading this morning, asks us to use a lens of caring and compassion in our policy development. She talks about the beloved community having more to do with our hearts and minds than with numbers and lines drawn in the sand. It is about our values. These values are not anything new or unique in our world. In fact, in almost all the materials I read in preparation for today's sermon, I found the same principles alluded to. Indigenous scholar and activist Randy Woodley talks about the harmony way as being embedded in all indigenous cultures. The principal values of respect and generosity, expressed through hospitality, ensure the care of everyone's needs, suggesting that how we care for the least provided for among us says something about the heart of who we are. What does the way we define and manage poverty here say about our hearts, our values as a people? It is apparently countercultural to think in more communitarian terms, but I hear these sentiments echoed in our principles as Unitarian Universalists: respect, equity, compassion. I lift these up all the time, you know them. The interconnectedness of people and planet that asks us to reconsider how we structure our societies. These ideas were important enough to us here to put them in our mission statement. The nurturance of inclusivity, seeking after equity, and justice, creating freedom. This is an action statement. As much as we love to refer to all of this as aspirational, and as I quoted the Reverend Michael Slack last time I was with you, Unitarian Universalism is happening, that is alive, where these things are being acted out in real time, not some hoped-for thing in a thought bubble above our heads. Wendell Berry, in our meditation today, begins his poem with perhaps the biggest little word we may know. He says, if we have the wisdom to survive, to stand, to renew, to enrich. It is a call to action filled with hardship, but also possibility. And you know how much I love a good reference to possibility. So what are we to do? I read about new movements involving shared existence in neighborhoods where things like washers and dryers and lawnmowers were owned communally, each family supplying a piece of the various necessities, a system of shared resources good for the people and the earth. And I read about the Hope Credit Union, which had its origins in rural North Carolina back in the days when white-run banks would not serve the Black community. What began in the tithing room of a local church has grown to 23 branches, which have generated more than $3.6 billion in financing in the Mississippi Delta and the Deep South. It made a way through the entrenched generational poverty and institutional discrimination that limits opportunity, providing loans to Black community members, making home ownership and business startups a possibility, noting that the imbalance of ownership and assets is a real barrier to mutual prosperity. Mutuality, the give and take of living that entitles all who participate. Part of the work of this endeavor is grounded in true reparations. Sometimes we think of reparations as digging up historical information on individuals our ancestors may have harmed and making monetary peace with their progeny in the present. This approach does little to create the much called for systemic shifts we are looking for. Two major corporations who had made promises to redistribute or invest capital, resources, and land to Black-owned businesses and organizations in the past couple of years have invested in Hope Credit Union to the tune of $54 million. By redirecting investments in this way towards organizations aligned with racial and economic justice, they are reshaping the definition of reparations. It asks what a commitment to racial justice looks like and suggests that if such a commitment exists for me, my next question is, what should be happening with my giving and my investing? When you support an organization that is providing a way forward for people of color, you are making an investment in their future that will ultimately shift the paradigm. There is a tipping point, as we heard Coretta Scott King refer to. We don't have millions to invest, that's for sure. But we may have opportunities on the horizon if we pay attention. Even something as simple as our monthly community outreach has the potential to be a part of the reparations picture here on the Cape. to be reparative in nature. One more story. Episcopal priest Becca Stevens shares having opened a home for 5 women survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction over 25 years ago. A place to live for free for 2 years. A sanctuary. Thistle Farm, as it was called, now has 30 global partners, employing over 1,600 women, and a mission to be a global movement for women's freedom. She shares that it initially seemed silly to think that by starting a small community, they could be part of changing the world, but says now that it seems ridiculous to think that the world will change if we don't do something, no matter how small. And I'll quote, "We have to do small things and believe a big difference is coming," she says. It's like the miraculous drops of water that seep through mountain limestone. They gather themselves into springs that flow into creeks, that merge into rivers, that find their way to oceans. Our work is to envision the drops as oceans. We do our small parts and know a powerful ocean of love and compassion is downstream. Each small gesture can lead to liberation. The bravest thing we can do in this world, she says, is not cling to old ideas or fear of judgment, but step out and just do something for love's sake. End quote. We will see how all this plays out for us, how our values and mission are both served and serve the wider community. It begs deeper questions about what we truly value, about what our own fears might be, about how clinging to the past may get in the way of real progress. Today's service is an invitation to each of us to take a deeper dive into the realities of poverty in our nation and in our communities. It is an invitation to each of us to re-examine our values and to consider how we can align ourselves more fully with what really matters to us. An invitation into the kind of self-examination required to free us up and allow us to be part of our changing communities and world. It is a reminder that our actions often do speak louder than our words, and I would say our inactions as well. And that by choosing how we commit ourselves, we are saying something about who we are as persons and as a people. So I end with a question. How can you use your life to redefine poverty? Blessed be, and amen.